Welcome to the Diesel Podcast presented by DFC Diesel. Kyle, welcome back to the podcast. How you been?
Good. How you, Patrick? Thanks for having me back.
Doing pretty good. I think race season is kind of winding down, except for today when we're recording this. There's a big one going on, but I know you stay really busy during the summer with a lot of events and races and traveling all over.
Yeah, I'm starting to see light at the end of the tunnel here. Yeah, so I just got a couple of our real big ones left, and call it a wrap for a year, and go hide for the winter, and come back and do it again next year.
Sounds fun. It's cool. We were talking before the podcast a little bit. You said, "Hey, there's a new product. There's an issue the truck owners face, and we've talked about fuel additives before, oil additives. We've even gone into transmission fluid a little bit, some other topics. This is completely brand new, so I wanted to basically learn along with you, telling me what this new product is that Hot Shot Secrets has."
Yeah, like you said, we started on the oil additive side, then we added fuel additives. This past year, we got into full-blown fuel with our new diesel racing fuel, and now we have a DEF additive. So it's one of those product lines that it's just very interesting. These DPF systems that we have to deal with, they're poorly manufactured. It's not really good science. There hasn't been a lot of technology advanced in them. They're problematic. They cause a lot of headaches, and most importantly, they cost a fortune. So we were asked to take a look into DEF fluid itself, the systems, how they work, and to see if we can create any new efficiencies to protect these systems, prolong them, because at the end of the day, we have to have them on the trucks. So the best thing to do is learn how to maintain them and keep your cost and your maintenance down on them so that they last a long time and, don't hit you in the pocketbook.
It's really, when you were mentioning the DEF stuff, it's kind of interesting. I'm sort of with trucks kind of stuck in a time warp, and then I have an older one, and I've kind of been there for a long time. And one of my friends said, "Hey, can you wanted me to drive his truck somewhere? He's having something done." I'm like, "Yeah, I'll drive it there for you." And it's a 2020 Ram 3500 Laramie, way nicer than my third gen, right? So he goes, "Hey, but I need some DF fluid. So just I'll reimburse you, but stop at a station somewhere, just throw some in there." And it's like my first experience with DEF, right? I'm like, I gotta pour something. Okay, I know what it is, but let me go find it. Let me do it. And then I think through the podcast and the comments that we get on YouTube and even emails, things like that, it's something I've noticed over the years has picked up with people having questions about it. The big one being crystallization of it and some check engine lights and codes they get. Can you take me to what sort of issues could you face with a truck that has a DF SCR system on it and the DF fluid? What can happen that you guys pointed out is an issue and a way to solve that issue that truck owners can have?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things that can happen. The most common things that we see are definitely from the crystallization, and that then can domino effect stuff. So one of the most understandable kind of issues to, I think, maybe some conversations we've had in the past about fuel and fuel additives and injectors, you basically have a DEF injector. There's a nozzle that is squirting that DEF fluid, and when that nozzle gets crystals built up on it, it affects that spray pattern, just like we see it on the fuel side of things. And so when you start to clog up that system and dirty that system, get crystals developing, that it affects that spray pattern, you're now not getting the proper burn inside that SCR system, and it becomes less efficient. And then as it starts becoming less efficient, it starts working harder than it should, and that's when these components start to fail. So a lot of it, I guess, in my brain, the way I understand things, is similar to that on the injector side. It's important to keep that nozzle clean so that it's firing right. But also, and we can get into why that's happening too. I'm just giving kind of some top level of the bigger problems. This crystallization you generally can even see. I know I've got we have a 2020 and a 2021 Ram hot shots trucks that we take our trailers around the country with, and you see the crystals building up, just from the drips that like get on your cap there where you're filling, and again, we can get into the details of that, but that's from the crystals in the solution. When the water evaporates, it leaves this behind. Well, you see it right there on the nozzle, on like where you're filling. That's not a problem there. The problem is that's happening inside the system as well. And then where it happens is not just on the nozzle, or what I call the injector, on the nozzle to it, but similar to like we talk about fuel tanks. It's important to keep fuel tanks full because that leaves less wall of your fuel tank to get condensation buildup that adds water to our fuel system. Well, similarly, inside your DEF tank, any exposed air where the DEF has splashed on things, well, the water side of the DEF evaporates and it leaves these crystals behind. We start to even see problems on the floaters. This is something we found in our research that was a bigger problem, especially on some of our larger Class 6-8 trucks as well. But the actual measurement of your fill level of your tank is on a lot of them are on a floater. Well, that floater gets coated with the DEF fluid, and as you decrease your DEF usage and it goes down, it starts to crystallize on the actual rod in the floater. So then your floater can get stuck. So it gives you misreads of how much DEF you have in your system. And then finally, just the actual, I'll call it the potency of the DEF can degrade. And whether that's from heat cycles, freezing cycles, just poor quality DEF to start with, DEF that's been contaminated, DEF that may not have been stored properly. There's a lot of things that can start to degrade the DEF. And once it becomes degraded down, you're not getting as much efficient burn. It's kind of like when we think on the fuel side, a low cetane, a low lubricity fuel is not going to burn and be as efficient as one that's highly additized. So we hope we get some good DEF, just like we hope we get some good fuel from the pump. But there's things you can do to preserve it, make sure that it's staying good, and there's things you can do to keep your system clean from the crystal buildup and the problems that come with it.
Hey, Diesel fans, we want to give a shout out to our friends over at Kershaw Knives. They have a 20% off code. So if you add some knives to your cart, add code 20 TDP 2026, you get 20% off of MSRP. It's a great way to save some money, get some cool gear if you're in the market for a new EDC knife, something for hunting, fishing, around the job site, around the house. They've got you covered with a bunch of different choices for blade steel, blade shape, different handle designs, different opening mechanisms, and their whole lineup's designed to meet any budget that you might have. So if you're in the market, head on over to Kershaw.kaiusa.com, use code 20 TDP 2026 and get 20% off your cart. Can we stay on that topic just for a little bit? Because you've talked to me before about fuel stations and how the quality of fuel varies and how you guys test different regions, different areas, and it can have a lot of variance with it. Does that same variance exist with DEF fluid? And then also to follow that up, is it kind of the same issue where maybe it's older, maybe it hasn't been stored correctly, maybe it's more prone to maybe not perform as it's designed because of age or storage conditions and things surrounding that part of it?
Good question. And the answer is yes and no. Generally speaking, any high quality produced DEF from any of the major manufacturers that produce DEF is usually in grade. It's a pretty simple formula. It's 32.5% urea and 67.5% deionized water. That's all it is. The water is really a carrying agent for the urea. There is a window there. It's a plus or minus 0.7%. So your urea content can be anywhere from a 31.8 up to a 33.2 and still be in spec. So some of those, so your more let's call them brand name DEF suppliers are usually always spot on with that 32.5, but there is a little variance. and it will burn good anywhere, around that middle point. So you definitely want to make sure you're buying it from a good supplier. That said, even a very good batch of DEF that's bottled and say sent to your local truck stop or gas station, depending on how they store that, can degrade the product. One of the problems that we see with it is both heat cycles and freezing cycles. Because it is 67.5% water, the biggest problem that we have with the crystallization forming is that evaporation of the water. So as you evaporate the water, that content becomes more where the crystals start to form. We have some jugs here from our testing that have been sitting for quite a while, and even just off the handle of the jug, you can look inside and see crystals forming inside of the DEF cube, the 2.5 gallon cube, that's sealed. So it doesn't even take an introduction of air or anything like that. At around, I think it's 86 degrees, let me quote that. At 86 degrees Fahrenheit, you can start to evaporate the water out of the DEF. So that's not crazy hot, So, and the hotter it gets, the more likely you are to have evaporation. And then that starts to degrade the product itself. Another thing that happens is on the cold side. Generally, if your DEF freezes on its own, let's say you got a cube sitting in the garage or something, and it freezes, when it thaws out, you're generally good. Everything will get back into solution generally. But the more it freezes, especially if you have something that goes through a freeze and thaw cycle, it starts to take away the ability of the water to be soluble, and therefore it wants to reject the urea in that formula even more. So it's just more prone to these issues of the separation and the crystallization buildup. So storage is important for these things. So even if you've got a good sealed cube, you don't want to keep it in especially a hot climate, a warm climate and moist. A cool, dry area is the best place to preserve your DEF over the long term. And so if you find a killer deal somewhere and you want to stock up on a bunch of DEF cubes that you found somewhere, make sure you're storing them properly if it's going to be a long time before you use them. I also believe it's not a product. The system is crazy expensive. The DEF itself is not generally that expensive, especially at the rate at which you use it. Don't take advantage of a doorbuster deal that somebody's trying to liquidate a bunch of DEF. They're probably doing that for a reason, or it's probably been around for a while. The money you save on a great deal on DEF just probably isn't worth the risk of a really expensive DPF system. So I say stay away from those great deals you might find. And just like we've talked in the past about fuel and quality of fuel and how much it moves, I feel the best DEF that you can get is something that's got a high turnover. So like I said, don't stop at some back road fuel station to fuel up. Well, don't grab DEF from that place either. And if you have a truck stop near you that's got high turnover and you can go straight to the DEF pump that they're moving a lot of DEF through, it's going to be fresh fluid, and that's going to give you the best opportunity to at least minimize the opportunity for these problems to happen.
I can't wait till this episode goes live and I can send it to some buddies I have that, like, I go to their house and in their barn they've got like 8 cubes of DEF that have been sitting there for I don't know how long. And I'm like, all right, tune in about here because this is where we talk about it. But it introduces the topic of not just storage, like where you buy it, but if you do, store some at home, and then how quick that crystallization can happen, like you mentioned, looking into the container and seeing it right there, which leads me into, okay, I think this is just going to happen naturally or over time with these systems. What sort of problems arise with a truck? Like, will I know that I have an issue, or will it be something that slowly happens over time? What kind of problems can you have with a truck with a DEF system and this crystallization?
So You will be notified on a lot of these problems, and I didn't have these memorized, so I got them down here. There's some very common OBD codes that pop up, so you might get your little friendly lit up dashboard. And P20EE, P20EF, P204F, P207F, P20E8, and P218F. I won't test you on those later, but we've got them recorded now so you can look them up. Those are very common codes that you get out of the system. So yes, sometimes you will get notification from the vehicle that you're having a problem in the DPF system. And there's a couple different reasons that things could be going on. Other times you're not going to necessarily get a code, but you might notice that you're consuming your DEF fluid at a much greater rate than you're used to. Like one thing I've noticed on our vehicles, I don't use very much DEF at all. And there's some reasons to that because I use good fuel additive, and I'll tell you how that ties together. But when I'm towing, and the heavier load I'm putting on the truck is generally when you start to use more DEF. So uniquely, when I started using our new product, which we'll get into, I've cut my DEF usage down in about half. But that is something to keep your eye on, is the rate at which you normally use your DEF. And everyone's truck's a little different, and the way they drive it's a little bit different. But should you start noticing that it's using it at a faster rate, or sometimes even if it's using it at a slower rate, and you might think, I'm doing pretty good here, but I made no changes. Sometimes that's a sign of like a stuck floater, like we said. You might think you've got more DEF in there, but you're actually using it at the same rate, but you're starting to get crystallizations inside the tank that's giving you some false readings. Same goes with the sensors that are on either side of this, monitoring the flow. They build up with crystals. They start to give you false readings. It's going to start sending signals to the vehicle, especially when you go into regen cycles and stuff like that, that could be wrong. And that's from crystals building up on the sensors. So there's a few things that you will experience as a driver if you know your truck well and you start to see some things different. And also, there's definitely some systems built into these that will give you a dash warning and a trouble code should you have an issue coming.
So where my mind's going is, if I owned one of these trucks and I have these issues, one is like, it's never good to have a check engine light come on. And then I think, okay, if I'm under warranty and I take it to the dealer, they diagnose it, they might help me. They probably would maybe the first time, but it starts to happen a few more times. Then I'm going to be responsible for the bill, or I think, okay, my basic warranty's out, or it's not covered by the OEM any longer. I just start to see dollar signs with sensors, with pumps, with everything else, and then I cringe because I know that stuff gets really expensive. So then I think, how can I prevent this? What can I do? And for a long time, I don't really think there was much out on the market, like in the kind of early 2010s, 2015s, kind of that area. We just kind of had to live with it. So how does this product that Hot Shot Secret has formulated, how does this help me avoid that expensive trip to a diesel shop or a dealer to replace or fix these components?
And you're spot on. They are stupid expensive, and they're certainly not fun do-it-yourself projects either. So you're usually going and paying somebody a lot of money for this stuff. But you're right on. We always like to look at prevention as well. So yeah, we can talk about problem solving with this, but let's start at the preventative side. Let's try to take care of the system the best we can before we have these problems. So before we even get into the DEF additive or quality DEF usage, let's start with the fuel that we're using and what we're putting these DPF systems through. Simply put, they're not efficient systems. They're not made well. Like I said, they're not engineered well. They all have problems. So if you go into it with the mentality of, this is a finicky system that I need to have my attention on, and if I treat this well on the front end, I'll get a long life out of it. If you wait till you have a problem, it's hard getting out of that problem. So one of the very first parts is the fuel. We obviously like to use a really good fuel additive. Our everyday treatment and our diesel extreme that we've talked about a lot has a lot of reasons on the fuel side and cleaning the system and lubricating the system, bringing the cetane up, all for the engine gains that we've talked about a bunch. What you're also doing with that is two very important things, and this is kind of what I consider the first step if we're going to talk about a two-step system to maintaining a DPF system. The first step is the preventative side with treating the fuel with a good additive that does two main things. Number one, cleans those injectors out. We want to keep these injectors clean, and I'm talking about the fuel injectors now. We want to keep these fuel injectors clean so they're atomizing that fuel properly, it's hitting that piston in that sweet spot, and you're getting the most efficient burn of the fuel as you possibly can from a properly firing injector. We want to use every single drop of that fuel in combustion to make things go. The second part of that is keeping them clean for the spray pattern is the cetane. We know that generally most states have a 40 cetane minimum. All of these trucks like to see a lot more. We want to be as close to 50, if not better, as we can. Our fuel additives raise cetane about 7 points. So if you're getting a bare minimum of 40, it will raise your cetane to about 47 cetane points. What happens as you raise the cetane of fuel, it opens up and extends the burn window of the fuel molecule. And what that allows you to do is make a more complete burn of the fuel. So now the byproduct is you have less particulate going to that DPF. So one of these preventative solutions is let's just take the strain off the system. If we can cut our particulate in half that's going to the DPF, you now just essentially double the life of that DPF. It's got so many cycles in it. Let's look at it that way. That DPF's gonna, the SCR system, it's all gonna regen so many times before it finally gives out and you have to worry about an expensive fix. So why not work on the preventative side of taking the strain off of it? Raise the cetane of your fuel, clean out your injectors, make sure you're firing that fuel properly, getting a complete burn, and that way you're cutting down all the particulate and the soot going to the DPF. Therefore, it doesn't need to work as hard or as often. So that's the first step. And a lot of times people don't, they're looking at DPF problems that happen down the road and don't realize that they've compounded that problem by getting there quickly by running poor fuel, which is sending a lot of byproduct, which tightens the window of the burn molecule, which sends more fuel and soot into the DPF, which makes it fill up quicker, which makes it regen quicker. And an easy solution is to get better fuel, treat your fuel, take the workload off of that system and extend it. Now that said, that gets us into more of the step 2 side. Now we're doing our job, we're keeping the fuel clean and keeping the injectors clean and keeping the cetane up. Well, you're still naturally putting the bad stuff that Mother Nature doesn't want out through an exhaust system. And that's the purpose of the system is to capture all that. It's nitrogen oxides that are actually the byproduct that are coming out that we're trying to capture in an exhaust system. And what's actually happening is in two different things. You have your DPF system and your SCR. SCR, I had to look it up, selective catalytic reduction. And that's unique because it's more similar to a catalytic converter from our gas side knowledge than the DPF side is. The diesel particulate filter is just what's catching all this nasty stuff. That system heats up to 700 degrees Celsius, so you're talking like 1200 degrees Fahrenheit, to burn off the soot that's inside there. And it's not necessarily that's not where you're spraying your DEF. That DPF system is, and I like my normal man terms. I didn't bring Kevin with me today to nerd out on it. So it's like a big oven, it's catching all this soot from the unburnt fuel and it's baking it and it's cooking it to get rid of it and to clean out that DPF to go more. What happens in that process is these nitrogen oxides, they call them NOx. You get a lot of NOx. Well, the NOx is not a very healthy gas. So that gets into the second part when we get into the SCR system of how we're going to convert that unhealthy gas into something that we can release out the tailpipe safely. And so that's where the DEF fluid actually gets introduced. And the mixture of the DEF, which is, again, we talked about earlier, 32.5% urea, as we basically cook that DEF, it creates ammonia. Ammonia mixed with the NOx becomes a byproduct of nitrogen gases, which is, I don't even know, 80% of the air we breathe. Nitrogen is a completely harmless gas, and water vapor. So that's what's being converted in that second part of the system, the SCR system. So we start with soot going in there, burning off, creating nitrogen oxides. Before we release the nitrogen oxides, we're introducing urea, which when it vaporizes turns into an ammonia substance that bonds with this in chemical reaction. The byproduct is safe stuff like nitrogen and water vapor. In a perfect system, that's how they've designed these to process these bad gases and turn them into tolerable environmental friendly gases.
Common question we get from you guys a lot is, hey, I need a diesel engine. I either, I can't wait this long to get one, or normal place I get stuff from it just takes too long, or they don't have the parts in it that I need. Maybe my truck's not stock, or I tow heavy with it. I don't want to go back with just a stock engine. DFC Diesel is a sponsor of the podcast. We worked with them, hand in hand on doing episodes, answering technical questions. They have a complete lineup of Cummins, Duramax, and Power Stroke remanufactured engines that are set to a standard of ISO 9001 2015 standards, which is a huge deal in the aftermarket. And there's certain levels of quality testing, validation that are required for that. So when you get one of those engines, the type of quality that's built behind it with an industry-leading warranty that's really comprehensive. And the other thing with that is, sometimes the options that are out there, it's a basic OEM engine. You want a little bit more. You don't want to have the same failure again. So there's a bunch of different series of engines that they have, from core, street, tow haul, and also the Speed of Air series, which we've covered on the podcast before. There's a lot of really cool benefits to it. And if you have questions about that, reach out to them. If you don't know the type of engine that you're looking for, if you go to dfcdiesel.com, there's a ton of info there. You can send an email or you can reach out to them. Also, they're working with Speed of Air pistons, which it's the only piston that pays for itself. And there's a lot of really cool technology behind it. So you can add that into your build and be able to get better fuel economy, increase power, increase torque, and better engine life out of it. Some of the most common engine applications or series of engines that they have with that lead time, a lot of them are in stock or they have really short lead times. So you can check your favorite retailer or go to dfcdiesel.com, check them out, see what's in stock, see what you can get. If you have questions, maybe you want to do something that's outside of the normal series of engines, they have tons of choices for rods, cranks, pistons, valve train upgrades, tons of different things. So if you're in the market, definitely make sure and head on over and check them out. So it makes sense about how you mentioned using fuel additives like on the hotshot truck and using less DEF because the system's all tied together. So the more that I'm loading the DPF, the more DEF fluid I'm going to use, or the less I load it, the less DEF fluid I'm going to use, and how it all works together. Where kind of in my mind, I used to think about them separately. I used to think about DEF separately from EGR, from the DEF, DPF, all that kind of stuff, but how it all ties together. Now, the next thing I think about is the crystallization you talked about and how easy that can happen or quickly it can happen. And what if I have some of these issues? What if I have one of those codes or a series of those codes that you mentioned earlier? How do I use this product to clean up the DF, like the tank, the lines, like every part of that system? How does it work?
So, just like we talked about with how the urea gets vaporized into an ammonia, at the rate at which it happens, if you start to have crystallization buildup, then you've really kind of altered the potency of that DEF. and it starts, you can degrade it because now it's not at a good concentration level. So preventatively, by adding a product like this, and one of the things that we do with our Defender product here is it has a, I don't even know if I'm allowed to say this. I might tell you something that is proprietary, but I'll say it, I don't care. We put our science out there. It's a way to break up the surface tension of that actual chemical. So with water and urea in there, what surface tension is if you take like a drop of water, let's say, and you put it on a table, and it sits there as like a ball of water. Surface tension is what's holding it from like flattening out and just kind of laying flat against the table. So the stronger the surface tension you have of something, if you drop a little drop of syrup, it's gonna make fun of me the way I said that, or honey has got a lot of surface tension, so it kind of wants to hold its form. Water is different as it goes down. Well, we actually have a chemical in there that reduces the surface tension of the water and urea in there. And what that allows it to do is be a more finely sprayed mist. Just like we do on the fuel side where we want real fine atomization. The finer that mist is of the injector where it's spraying the DEF, the better. The better, more efficient it burns and turns into the ammonia and has this chemical reaction. When you start to build up crystals in the system, it'll affect that pattern as it's spraying naturally, and it will glob up, and you will have droplets that are harder to burn off. They hold their tension more. So one of the aspects we've added to that is just release the tension of that. So it's a really, think of it as like a really runny water. It's a really thin. It's been thinned out so that it can be atomized a lot better. That helps on the preventative side. So before you have a problem, by really reducing the surface tension of your DEF, it'll make it a more functional product for you. I mean, it protects the system better. It burns off better. One other unique part by changing the surface tension of the water in there, it makes it harder to freeze. So we now also reduce the freezing point of your DEF, which is a big problem. I didn't think it was the biggest problem as it was until I started doing some research into it. But DEF freezes just like anything else would, and we see it a lot more depending on the trucks. Light duty, not as much. Again, class 6 to 8 that have some external systems, it can freeze. And again, when it freezes, you're now separating the water and the urea. As soon as you start pulling water from the urea is when the crystals start to form. So it's almost more of on a preventative side to reduce that tension strength of it, but also on the problem solving side of it. Like you said, now I've got a crystal buildup. How do I get it back? How do I clean this up and get it back? Well, the good part about it is it's just really like again, in my layman's terms, think of these crystals as the leftover once you evaporated the water. It's just like if you've ever done like the salt crystals things and stuff, and you can boil the water off and you leave all the salt behind. Well, that's where the crystals are coming from. They can go back into solution. So if you mix them with the water again, urea, it'll dissolve your crystals. But one way of helping that process is by reducing the water tension of it so that it spreads easier and finds the crystals and reliquefies them and turns them back into a liquid form again. So that's stuff inside your tank. So for example, like the example I used earlier of the floater inside the tank, keeping that tank full and in solution, especially once you've brought the water tension down, it'll reliquefy any of those crystals very easily. The tougher part of those cleaning are where you see stuff that's like not going to be back in solution around the tank nozzle itself. Like when I see it, when I open up my little door and I see all the white stuff there, well, that's exposed to the air. That's already dried off. Those crystals are going to be there. Well, that same thing's happening on the tip of the sprayer as well. So it's a closed system, and when it sprays, a drip will form at the end of it, and that drip will slowly evaporate and leave behind a crystal deposit, and over time that builds up. So the best way to keep that from happening or clean it out when it's happening is by using an additive like this that will get that all cleaned out for you and prevent it before you have the problem.
Here's my big question. As far as using it, is it something that I add to my DF tank? I think I would want to do it all the time to prevent it, like you mentioned. But then, like, what if I have one of those check engine lights and I want to start there? I want to start with a fresh system, so to speak. Is there different dosages based on, like, I'm having an issue, I use a little bit more versus I just want to maintain it and add a little bit every time I add DEF, or how do you dose the product?
There is no other dosage level. We just have one dosage level. And the reason why it's very important to keep the DEF within spec. So it's a very small dosage too. Like these bottles here, that it's a 8-ounce bottle, and this treats 8 2.5 gallon cubes of DEF. So this lasts a long time. It's a very cheap, inexpensive product. That's one thing we like to do at Hot Shots. We want to develop stuff that solves problems, but the formulation of this product does not call for some very expensive components. So we didn't want to jack up the price on this because we probably could, because of how much value you're saving from an expensive system. But in reality, I believe these are $10, $9.95. So $9.95, and there's 8 treatments in here. So you're talking about $1.25 per cube, per 2.5 gallons of treatment. And one of these will last you 8 cubes. So to throw an extra $1.25 every time you buy a cube, that, generally I think we're paying $15, $20 for a 2.5 gallon DEF fluid. And depending on how much you use it, it's not that much. But to maintain inside that window of 32.5% urea plus or minus 0.7 at this dosage, which is a 1 to 320 dosage, it's a pretty small dosage. That's 0.3%. And then even within that 0.3%, we still have 60% plus deionized water. So it's even less than that. So it's roughly a 0.1% dosage. So it's a very tiny dosage, and it keeps that DEF within spec as well. So if you're having a problem and you're trying to do a crystal clean out and you're having a big buildup, you and I have had this conversation before. Sometimes people think, well, if a little's good, then a lot must be great, and I got crystals everywhere. I'm just going to pour this whole bottle in there. Don't do it. Don't do it. All you're doing is wasting money, and you're potentially taking the fluid out of spec. So you always want to stick with the recommended dosage, which is 1 ounce per 2.5 gallons of DEF fluid. That will be your preventative dosage, as well as your problem-solving fixing dosage. Where it differs, if you have a major crystal buildup, is that you just want to run multiple cycles of it through. You don't want to increase the dosage to offset the balance of the urea to water ratio. You just want to keep using it, which I recommend using it in every tank anyways as preventative. If you have a problem that's bad, just start using the product. And if it doesn't clean it out after the first tank because you have a big buildup, it might take 2 or 3 tanks to get everything nice and cleaned out. But it will get it cleaned out. You just don't want to overdose the product to get there. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Yeah, I get it. Okay. I think that leads me to ask you another question. It focuses on this topic, but it's more general. And some discussions I've seen on social media, different places like that, people have talked about the crystallization of DPF, and people would have different remedies they would do. Like somebody would say, "Oh, I just add water to it," and do different things. And I wanted to focus it in on that ratio you mentioned, because that's something some people would bring up is, well, the system's designed to operate this certain percentage. The systems on board of the truck in the SCR DF system are going to pick up on that. It's not helping you. And I think that might be a question maybe some listeners have is, okay, is this going to affect that ratio at all? And you touched on it earlier, but I thought it'd be cool to spend a little bit more time on that, is how important that ratio is, and then adding something to the DF fluid you put in your truck, keeping it within that safe range that the system's built around. Like, you guys are at shows a lot. You talk with tons of people, work with a lot of shops. I'm sure you hear stories of people putting different stuff other than DF into the tank to do things. Like,
Sure.
how important is that ratio?
It is important, and it's funny because if you want to Google urea and find out actually what that component is, it's nasty piss water. It's some nasty stuff. So people are like, oh, well, if you're putting that stuff in, I can put anything in. You know, like, that's not necessarily the case. That you have to understand the reason why the system uses urea is that when it becomes vaporized, it creates the ammonia. And ammonia is what we're trying to get to, because the ammonia is what interacts with the NOx to turn it into nitrogen and water. So we need to get to a point of the ammonia doing its job. The way we get there is by having the urea carried by water and once it's vaporized at that percentage, it creates the proper ammonia to get the job done. If you alter that mix at all, it's not going to give you the same chemical reaction on the backside. So if you have too much water in there, if you have too much ammonia in there, or I'm sorry, if you have too much urea in there, you're not going to get the same chemical compounds and the ammonia that you need to mix properly with the NOx gases in there to make this magical compound that results in really healthy stuff like nitrogen and water. So a lot of those home remedies that you speak of, that you've seen, you're risking adding more problems to the system with that, because you're taking the DEF out of spec. The system doesn't know that. The system's just feeding off the fluid in there. But the byproduct, the chemical byproducts from it differ. So your results are different. So it's really important that you keep it within spec. And again, there is a little window there, plus or minus 0.7% on that 32.5% urea. And that's the window that we try to play in when we're trying to bring the quality of the product up. And that's why we're at a dosage that breaks down to about 0.1%, so it keeps us really tight in there. But it still allows us to, again, like, cut down the tension, the strength of it, add enough to be able to reduce the freezing point of it, and still allows everything to re-liquefy those old crystals that have formed and turn them back into liquid form, so that your balance is still within that window of the spec on DEF to burn properly.
That makes sense.
So don't use gangster versions. Buy good DEF. Use a quality additive. Stop mixing stuff up in your garage. You'll thank yourself later.
I got another question for you, because we have talked about this on the fuel side before, with some of the products that you guys have to be able to stabilize diesel fuel. And I'm thinking somebody might ask, okay, I've got that old DEF fluid that's sitting in my garage, or this, whatever it is, can I toss this in there and kind of get it back to where it needs to be? So I thought it'd be a worthwhile question to ask you, in case somebody's thinking that or wondering if it operates on the same principle. So how does it work with this product? And maybe it is an older DF cube, or maybe it's partially open and it's been sitting, in a garage for a little bit.
So I would love to tell you that this is some magic sauce that will bring stuff back from the dead and make it premium, DEF again. But it's just like fuel. If fuel's started to oxidize, don't try to save it. We can additize the heck out of fuel and bring it back in, to make it burnable and somewhat safe on the system while you're burning it out and stuff. Like, we've had large tank farms and stuff that have, millions of dollars of fuel they're trying to save. I get it, but the guy trying to save 3 gallons in his tank is not worth it. Same thing goes with the DEF. We do have some big jobbers, some big fleets that we work with that have giant bulk DEF tanks that have tons of money involved in them, that they invest. We can polish those, we call it polishing and stuff. There's ways to treat those and if you have issues. For the average guy out there with a light duty truck with a 5-gallon DEF system, don't try to save it. You know, like toss the stuff. If you have a bunch sitting in your garage that's old, to me, it's just not worth it. Now, if you happen to invest in thousands of dollars of DEF and it's in your garage, yeah, it's old and you really want to save it, you certainly should treat it. I guarantee you that crystals have already formed at some point. If it's been through, unless you had it in a climate-controlled environment that was dry, that never saw anything between 65 degrees and 75 degrees, man, you're doing good. You probably took advantage of buying some stuff in bulk, but I just don't know many people that are doing that. And it's such a low expense that knowing what the fuels, what the system costs to repair and deal with, I'm not going to tell you I got a magic product that's going to make somebody's 10-year-old DEF all of a sudden good. Toss it, take it, chalk up as a loss. Now, if you're forced to, then certainly you want to add additive. But again, to your previous question, at the still same dosage, no extra because it's extra old.
Makes sense. I think my next question, because it's a new product for you guys. I'm sure it's out there. Like, you know, you guys have it on the website. It's probably at preferred retailers that you guys have. Is it like where can I find this? You know, maybe locally, or how can I pick some up?
So this one was kind of a unique one. You can obviously go to our website, hotshotsecret.com. We sell it direct on our website. It's available currently through our dealer network, which I always encourage people to go on and support our local dealers. They're the diesel shop in your town, the 1-2 bay shops. I like supporting these guys, up to your really big diesel shops. If you go to our website, there's a button that says where to buy. You can punch in your zip code and actually find a local independent dealer near you, which is cool because then you can create a relationship with the diesel guy that can take care of your truck and you know somebody. Stopping in there to buy a bottle is a great way to make that introduction. But, and we've talked retail before. Retail's crazy. Retail's tough to get your products in. It takes forever. Line reviews. Usually when we release a product, we're a year or two out from ever getting on the retail shelf. This one actually kind of worked backwards where some of our retailers, we had a couple of our retailers actually come to us and say that their customers were asking for more premium DEF. They're seeing more DPF issues and problems. So we love problem solving. This has always been on our radar. We've done some R&D in the past on it. Wasn't something we entirely really wanted to focus on and get into it initially. It's on the list. It's just, it was lower on the list, if you will. And for once, like, our retailers came to us and said, people are really need something here. So we developed this based on that. And so this product, while it's brand new, it's already in retail at Tractor Supply Company. They already have it on the shelf. They were one of the first people to come to us with the problem. So it's very rare for us to launch a product and already be on a retail shelf available, but it's because of the way that this problem is presented to us and we formulated the fix. So yeah, our website, direct dealers, or currently on Tractor Supply shelves, and it'll be coming to a lot more retail shelves soon.
Very cool. I appreciate you talking with me today about this. It's like I said, it's something I've seen grow in requests for like conversations and discussions is about the DEF system, and I've enjoyed learning, you know, through today the issues that it can have and a way I can stay ahead of it, which I love. That's kind of the focus of a lot of our conversations is, you know, I want to stay ahead of things. I don't want to be in crisis mode when my truck doesn't start or something like that. I want to think ahead, and not just with this, but things you guys do with fuel, with oil, with other products. So it's always really great to chat with you, Kyle, and I appreciate you telling me about this this new product today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again, and you hit it right on the head. That's how we like to look at it too. There's problems that we solve, but the preventative side is so much easier, and we're excited about this product because it's really affordable. It's $1.25 insurance on your cube to protect a really expensive system. So we're glad to have it out there for people that do have to deal with and protect these very expensive exhaust systems on these trucks. So So thanks for having me on again, Patrick. Appreciate it.
Don't forget, Diesel fans, make sure and head on over to Kershaw.kaiusa.com. Use code 20, TDP 2026 to get 20% off your cart. It's a great way to save some money, get some cool gear if you're in the market for a new EDC knife, something for hunting, fishing, around the job site, around the house. They got you covered with a bunch of different choices for blade steel, different opening mechanisms, different handle designs, and their whole lineup's designed to meet any budget that you might have. So if you're in the market, head on over to their website, use code 20, TDP 2026, and get 20% off your order. Also want to give a shout out to some of our Patreon supporters, Tyler Lowen at 23 Diesel, Cutter Up Rob, Robert, all of our other Patreon supporters, all of you who subscribe on YouTube and podcast apps, follow us on social media. We appreciate all your support here in year 9 of the Diesel Podcast, and look forward to bringing you more of the content that you want to hear in 2025. Till next time, keep the shiny side up.